The discovery of the sepulchre of the Apostle Santiago, or St. James the Great, in the first third of the 9th century, compelled many Christians to make pilgrimages to Compostela to worship his relics. It had been a few years since construction of the second church in honor of the Apostle Santiago had ended. King Alfonso III, the Great, had provided enough resources to erect a more solid and ample temple than the humble shrine that housed the saint's sacred tomb. Its needs had changed. The new building, besides guarding and honoring the relics of the apostle and his disciples Teodoro and Atanasio, had to take in a greater number of pilgrims coming from the peninsular kingdoms, as well as from the rest of Europe. These are the beginnings of a fascinating story, a fabulous saga spanning centuries, carried out by thousands of people united in their devotion to the figure of the Apostle Santiago in a remote corner of Finisterre. They called it Compostela, the Field of Stars. This is the magnificent Plaza del Obradoiro. Thousands of pilgrims from everywhere in the world have been traveling to this point for 1,000 years. The perfect mix of touristic sports adventure and religious sentiment make the Way of St. James, as it is known in English, an incomparable experience. Even though Jerusalem, Rome, and Santiago have been the 3 great destinations for pilgrims since the Middle Ages, the Jacobean route to Santiago is the only one that is still traveled the same way today as it was back then, on foot and with little else than a shoulder pouch. It had been a long time since news of the discovery of the Santiago sepulchre had reached France. Near the end of the millennium and in the fields of Aquitania, stories were told of pilgrims who went to worship the Apostle's tomb to the far reaches of the Galician lands, over in the Finisterre. Once the Reconquista of the north of the peninsula was concluded and its roads cleared, pilgrims from different regions of Europe headed toward Santiago de Compostela along the 4 routes that crossed French territory and coalesced in the Navarran town of Puente de la Reina. From there, one unique way would take them to Santiago. Bishop Diego Peláez decided to build a new church to replace the pre-Romanesque basilica. After Almanzor's ferocious attack, the reconstructed temple proved to be too small for the steady increase in pilgrims. Master Bernardo, recently arrived from Conques, had updated the bishop on the architectural techniques they had been adopting in southern France. The Romanesque building that still stands today would soon get underway. But before learning of the process that led to building the magnificent and legendary cathedral, let's go further back in time to the origins of this marvelous story. The excavations carried out under the cathedral uncovered something more than the vestiges of the first temples dedicated to the consecration of the apostles' relics. Archaeological remains uncovered the existence of a Roman village that dates back to the first 4 centuries of the Common Era. Many of their materials and structures were reused in the Middle Ages. But we can still see the remains of the necropolis, some of its walls, and part of its mausoleum, that in which the remains of the apostle and his disciples were found, and which today constitutes the crypt that contains the urn with his relics. We fly over the city of Santiago. From up here, we can see the cathedral, and near it, the church of San Felix de Solobio. Thus, according to archaeological research, we can imagine the situation in the year 1. Where the cathedral now stands, there would have been a small Roman fortification, and in place of the church of San Felix, a small village of farmers located on an ancient fort of Celtic origin. These sites remained for 4 centuries, and starting in the 5th century, they were abandoned. As the years passed, plant life covered the place, forming a lush mount. The small farmers' village was reduced to a simple hamlet in which to gather cattle. And it is in this place where chronicles tell of a hermit known as Pelayo, who, as he fasted, observed some lights shining on the ancient Roman citadel. But Pelayo was not the only one to contemplate this phenomenon. Some shepherds were also witness to the strange lights. The event reached Teodomiro, the bishop of Iria Flavia, which was back then the episcopal see, and today is a parish in the Padron municipality. Before such news, the bishop arrived at the site and discovered the entrance to a small sepulchre among the weeds. He discovered 3 tombs a few meters underground, the middle one protected by a slab of marble. Teodomiro did not hesitate to attribute these burials to the apostle Santiago and his disciples Teodoro and Atanasio. Alfonso II, King of Asturias, decided to erect a basic but well-stocked sanctuary. A church was built above the sepulchre to worship the apostles' relics, and beside it, the small monastery of Ante Altares to house the community of monks that would look after the so-called Locus Sancti Jacobi. Construction was finished in 830, and Bishop Teodomiro consecrated the first church of Santiago. Exactly where 4 centuries earlier a Roman village existed, the primordial nucleus of the future cathedral and city of Santiago now surged.
During medieval times, Spain became an important pilgrimage destination. Pilgrims from all over Europe journeyed to Santiago de Compostela in the northwest of Spain. Stands the French Basque town of Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. Traditionally, Santiago-bound pilgrims would gather here to cross the Pyrenees and continue their march through Spain. Visitors to this popular town are a mix of tourists and pilgrims. At the Camino office, pilgrims check in before their long journey to Santiago. They pick up a kind of pilgrim's passport. They'll get it stamped at each stop to prove they walked the whole way and earned their Compostela certificate. Walking the entire 500-mile-long route takes about 5 weeks. That's about 15 miles a day with an occasional day of rest. The route is well marked with yellow arrows and scallop shells. The scallop shell is the symbol of both St. James and the Camino. Common on the Galician coast, the shells were worn by medieval pilgrims as a badge of honor to prove they made it. The traditional gear has barely changed. A gourd for drinking water, just the right walking stick, and a scallop shell dangling from each backpack.